Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you share this time. It's some really interesting excerpts from Benedict Carey's How We Learn, and we dive deep to pull out the core insight.
That's right. The goal here, as we understand it, is helping you get a solid grasp on the science of learning and memory. Get those aha moments quickly, but without getting, totally overwhelmed.
Exactly. So let's jump right in and explore some of these surprising truths about how our brains actually work when it comes to learning.
It really is remarkable stuff. I mean, just think about the sheer amount of information your brain is dealing with, like right now.
Oh, yeah.
The kettle whistling, maybe some movement you catch out of the corner of your eye, perhaps that little ache in your back.
Mm-hmm.
All while you're trying to follow this conversation, maybe thinking about dinner later, it's constantly processing and filtering. It's, frankly, astonishing.
It really is. And the foundation of all this, biologically speaking, are the neurons, right? These tiny little switches in our brains.
Yeah, exactly. Billions of them, forming these incredibly complex networks. When you learn something new, specific groups of them fire together.
And this leads to that fascinating UCLA study from 2008 with the epilepsy patients.
Oh, yeah, that was a key one. They had electrodes implanted, and researchers showed them, short video clips, little bits of Seinfeld, The Simpsons, famous faces, landmarks.
Right.
And the truly astounding part, the bit Dr. Itzhak Fried, who led the study, highlighted, was when a patient later recalled one of those clips.
The brain activity just replayed.
Precisely. The exact same pattern of neurons fired again, like an echo of the original experience. It showed memory isn't just pulling up a file, it's more like rerunning the program.
Wow. So remembering is actually reconstructing the brain state.
In essence, yes.
Yeah.
Which really makes you think about those super vivid memories we all have.
Definitely. I still have this crystal clear image of my first day of high school. It was 1974. I can picture the dusty sunlight in the hall. The walls were this awful teal color. This older kid slouched by his locker, pack of Winstons roll up in his sleeve, and this red-haired teacher who pointed me towards my first class. It's so specific.
That's a perfect example of what psychologists call episodic memory, those detailed snapshots of personal events.
Right, episodic.
And they feel so real because they're encoded in these strong neural networks. Now, how do they stick around long term? Well, scientists talk about a kind of molecular bookmark.
A bookmark.
Sort of. Something tags those connections, keeps them accessible. But, and this is crucial, these memories aren't static. They're not like photos locked in an album.
Okay.
My memory now of, say, 8th grade summer camp is probably quite different from how I described it back then, or even how I described it in college. We reshape memories as we gain new experiences.
That makes total sense. Our understanding changes, so the memory shifts a bit too. This all ties into the famous case of H.M. and Henry Molaison, doesn't it?
Absolutely. H.M. is, foundational in memory research. In 1953, surgery to treat severe epilepsy involved removing parts of his medial temporal lobes,
including the hippocampus, which is sort of central command for forming new memories.
Pretty much, yeah. It's crucial for consolidating experiences into long-term storage, and the outcome for HM was profound. His epilepsy improved, but he lost the ability to form new long-term memories.
So every day was like starting over for him?
Largely, yes. He'd meet someone, do an activity, and minutes later, it was gone, like it never happened. He could hold things in short-term memory, though.
Right. Brenda Milner's work showed that, like remembering those numbers, 5, 8, 4, by just repeating them over and over.
Exactly. He could keep them active through rehearsal for, maybe 30 seconds or even longer if uninterrupted. But the moment his attention shifted, gone. But interestingly, later work by Suzanne Corkin showed he wasn't a complete blank slate about his past. He had these gist memories.
Gist memories, like the general idea.
Sort of. He knew about major events like the war, figures like FDR. He could even sketch the layout of his childhood home. But the specifics, the when, the detailed context that was missing, it really highlighted the hippocampus's role in creating those rich, new, detailed memories.
Okay, so we've got the basic mechanics, the neurons firing, the hippocampus consolidating. But getting memories back out, retrieval, that's a whole other layer, isn't it? It's not just about the individual cell.
Not at all. You need a broader view. The split brain experiments are fascinating here.
Ah, yes, where they show different images to each side of the brain.
Right. So maybe the left brain sees a chicken picture, the right brain sees a snow scene. Then the person has to pick related items. Left hand points to a chicken, makes sense. Right hand points to a shovel for the snow.
Okay.
But then you ask why they picked the shovel. The left brain, which handles language but didn't see the snow, it just makes something up.
It confabulates.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed.
Yeah.
It creates a narrative to make sense of the actions, even with incomplete information.
Wow. Our brains are basically storytelling machines, constantly trying to create a coherent picture.
They really are. Which, brings us to common misconceptions, like the idea of a photographic memory.
Which scientists mostly think doesn't really exist, right? Not in that perfect video recorder way.
Generally, no. And the other big one is forgetting. We see it as purely negative, a failure.
Yeah, losing information.
But it's actually vital. Think of forgetting as a super effective spam filter. It lets us focus on what matters by clearing out the clutter.
Like those spelling bee champions, they know obscure words but might forget their email password.
Precisely. Their brains are highly optimized for spelling, filtering out the everyday stuff that would just interfere. It's not memory loss, it's focused attention.
Okay, so forgetting helps us learn, in a way.
That's the core of the forget to learn theory. It suggests memories aren't usually erased entirely. It's more about retrieval strength versus storage strength.
Retrieval versus storage. Can you break that down?
Sure. Imagine a huge party filled with everyone you've ever known. Storage strength is how well you know them, how much interaction you've had. Retrieval strength is how easily you can pick them out and name them right now.
Okay.
Your parents. High storage, high retrieval. Easy. Your first grade teacher. Probably high storage, you learned a lot. But retrieval might be low now. You'd recognize them, but the name maybe takes a second. The new neighbors you just met. High retrieval right now, but low storage, you barely know them yet. That driving instructor from years back. Probably low on both counts.
Got it. That party analogy makes it really clear. So storage is how well it's in there. Retrieval is how easily you can get it out.
Exactly. And understanding that difference is key to figuring out how we can actually hold on to information better.
Yeah.
How we improve retention.
Right. Let's talk about retention then. How do we strengthen that grip?
Well, one factor that's maybe underestimated is context. The environment where you learn something.
You mean like where you physically are?
That, but also your mental state. Remember those old college myths about study aid pills? Take one before the exam to get back in the zone.
Ah, yeah, I remember those. Total placebo, probably.
Mostly, sure. But the underlying idea touches on something real. Recreating the mental state, the feeling of studying, can actually help recall. The environment acts as a cue.
I can relate to that. I used to study late nights in the university math building way back in '82. Super quiet, nobody around. And this retired physics professor used to sometimes show up, lovely old guy, and he'd ask me things like why quartz is used in watches, or make me derive the Pythagorean theorem using geometric shapes right there on the dusty chalkboard.
Impromptu learning.
Yeah. And even now, just thinking about that building brings back a faint echo of that focused late-night feeling.
That's the context effect. Being in a similar environment or even just mentally revisiting it can prime the memories learned there. But strong hints can sometimes override that.
How so?
Like with your Pythagorean theorem example.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't thinking about the math building, if someone just drew the first couple of shapes from that geometric proof.
It would probably all come flooding back. The hint is stronger than the general context.
Exactly. It provides a more direct pathway. Now, some people have an extraordinary ability to use context, like Shereshevsky, the guy Luria studied.
The one with the incredible memory.
Phenomenal memory. He could recall complex grids of numbers years later by essentially mentally putting himself back in the room where he first saw them. He'd see the room, hear Luria's voice, recreate the whole sensory experience.
Wow, that's beyond what most of us can do.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But it illustrates the principle, and research shows even modest changes in context help. There was a study in the 70s, Smith, Bjork, and Glenberg.
What did they do?
They had students study word lists. One group studied in the same room twice. The other group studied in 2 different rooms. Then they tested everyone in a completely new third room. The group who studied in 2 different rooms, they recalled significantly more words.
Just from changing the study location once.
Yep. Smith, the researcher, even changed his clothes and general appearance between the sessions for that group to add to the environmental difference. It seems encoding information in varied contexts creates more potential retrieval cues.
So, bottom line, mix up your study spots. Don't just stick to the same desk every time.
It seems to help build more robust recall, yes. It makes the memory less dependent on one specific set of cues.
Interesting. Okay. What else helps with long-term retention?
The other big one is the spacing effect. We all know about the forgetting curve, right? You learn something, and then recall drops off pretty quickly.
Yeah, depressingly quickly sometimes.
Right. But the Bjorks, Robert, and Elizabeth introduced this idea of desirable difficulties. Things that make learning feel a bit harder initially can actually lead to much better long-term retention.
Okay, like what?
Spacing out your study sessions is a prime example. Instead of cramming, you revisit the material at increasing intervals.
Right, spaced repetition.
Exactly. Pyotr Wozniak, who developed the SuperMemo software, did tons of self-experimentation learning English vocabulary. He tracked when he forgot words and figured out that reviewing them just as he was about to forget was incredibly efficient.
So you let yourself almost forget it, then refresh it.
That's the idea. It forces your brain to work harder at retrieval, which strengthens the memory trace. Later research, like by Weishart and Paschler, tried to pin down optimal intervals.
Is there a magic formula?
It depends on how long you need to remember it. If your test is in a week, maybe review after a day or two. If it's a month away, maybe space the first review out by a week. For a test months away, the first gap could be even longer. But for practical purposes, for most students, spacing reviews by a day, then maybe a few days, then a week or so. That's generally a good starting point.
So if I have a German exam in 3 months, I shouldn't just cram the week before.
Definitely not for long-term retention. You'd study a bit today, maybe review those specific things again in a week, then perhaps 3 weeks after that, and so on, gradually increasing the gaps.
It feels like you're building the memory up layer by layer over time.
That's a great way to put it. William James said something similar way back. Something about information recurring on different days in different contexts gets well wrought into mental structure. Spacing helps weave that structure.
Okay, context and spacing for retention makes sense. But what about actually using the information, getting it out when needed, retrieval?
Right, the crucial moment. And this is where the testing effect is incredibly powerful. The act of retrieving information itself makes the memory stronger and easier to retrieve later.
So taking a test isn't just assessment, it's actually a learning tool.
A very effective one. It does more than just measure what you know. It changes the memory itself, makes it more durable.
I remember reading about Winston Churchill's entrance exam for Harrow. He studied history and geography like mad. And the first question on the actual exam was a Latin translation he wasn't expecting.
Huh. Well, even just the attempt to retrieve that Latin probably strengthened whatever Latin he did know. But there's more direct research. Arthur Gates, back in 1917,
What did he find?
he had kids memorize Who's Who entries. He varied how much time they spent initially reading versus time spent trying to recite it from memory.
Yeah.
The best results came from spending most of the time reciting, actively testing themselves. Something like 7 minutes of reciting for every 1 or 2 minutes of initial reading.
Wow, that's heavily skewed towards self-testing. You'd think reading more would be better.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But the active retrieval process seems to be the real engine of long-term learning, and this was largely ignored for decades. Then Herbert Spitzer did a massive study in 1939.
Okay.
Thousands of sixth graders studied articles, like about peanuts or bamboo. Then they took multiple choice tests at different times. The key finding: kids who took a test soon after studying and then maybe another one later.
They remembered more.
Significantly more, even with no extra study time. That initial test made a huge difference. It cemented the learning. That's what we now call retrieval practice.
So just passively rereading notes isn't the way to go?
It's far less effective than actively trying to pull the information out of your own head.
We could even suggest a quick experiment for listeners, couldn't we?
Absolutely. Find 2 short, similar passages. For passage 1, read it through, say, 4 or 5 times. Then later today, read it again a couple of times.
Okay, standard rereading.
Right. For passage 2, read it the same number of times initially, but later, instead of rereading, test yourself. Try to write down everything you remember without looking.
Active recall.
Exactly. Then tomorrow, try to recall the main points from both passages. You'll almost certainly find you remember much more from passage 2, the one you tested yourself on.
That really drives home the power of retrieval practice. Okay, so active recall is key. Let's shift gears a bit. What about those times when you're stuck on a problem and the answer just pops into your head later? Incubation.
Incubation. That mysterious process where your subconscious seems to keep working on something even when you're not actively thinking about it.
I had this happen once. Quite embarrassingly, actually. I had to give an impromptu talk at a middle school, and I gave them that classic pencil problem.
Oh, the 6 pencils, each touching every other one. How?
They were totally stumped, really trying hard, furrowing their brows, trying to think outside the box,
Yeah,
but getting nowhere. They were stuck.
that's common. It relates to Graham Wallace's stages of creativity. You've got preparation, understanding the problem, then incubation, you step away, then illumination, the aha moment, and finally verification, checking the answer.
And the incubation part often happens when you're not focused on the problem.
Often, yes. Think of Helmholtz, the physicist, apparently getting insights during relaxed walks after struggling with the problem,
Hmm.
or Poincaré, the mathematician, having breakthroughs when trying to sleep after too much coffee.
It's like your brain's background processes are still churning away.
Kind of like a weekend DIY project. You're trying to replace an old door handle, getting frustrated because the new screws don't fit the old mechanism.
Been there.
Right. You give up, go have lunch, and while you're eating your sandwich, boom, the idea hits you. Just use the old screws with the new handle parts. Your brain connected the dots while you were distracted.
So sometimes the problem is that we're too focused, almost.
It can be. We get stuck in what's called fixedness, or a mental set. We approach the problem with assumptions that block the solution.
Like desperately searching for scissors to open a package when your house keys are right there and would work fine.
Exactly. Or that puzzle, sequenc. We assume the blank must be a letter,
Right, NCE.
and that assumption blinds us to the actual pattern, which is just the first letters of the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
The blank should be T for 7.
Okay, so taking a break helps break that fixedness.
It seems so. Studies using things like remote associates tests, where you find a word linking 3 others like cottage, Swiss, cake, answer cheese, show that even short breaks help people solve them, especially if they were initially misled by a common but wrong association.
It's like getting lost driving, going down the wrong road, then stopping for a minute lets you see the alternative route you missed.
A good analogy. During that break, maybe you selectively forget the misleading cues, or you just start thinking about the elements differently, free associating. The exact mechanism for getting, reimagining, association is still debated, but the benefit of stepping away when you're truly stuck is pretty clear.
Good practical advice. Okay, let's move to the final part, this idea of the foraging brain and perceptual learning. What's that about?
Foraging brain refers to a slower, perhaps more meandering way of learning that allows understanding to kind of percolate. It's less about immediate performance and more about gradual absorption and pattern recognition.
Percolate. I like that.
Rhonda Leathers-Dively, a writing instructor, noticed this. She initially assigned lots of short essays, but her students just produced cut-and-paste summaries, as she called them.
Not much deep thinking going on.
Right. So she switched. Fewer, much longer essays, requiring students to engage deeply with just a few sources over a longer time.
And what happened?
The quality soared. Students started developing their own arguments, really thinking critically. By slowing the process down, that usually invisible work of deep understanding became visible.
So sometimes trying less intensely, giving things time is actually more effective, like quitting before you feel you're totally done.
Exactly. Booth observed this in skilled athletes or musicians, too. They sometimes seem to stop practicing right when they're getting good, but it's likely to allow for that subconscious consolidation, that percolation. This ties into the idea of being mixed up, interleaving different but related topics.
We talked about this a bit with context, but this is more about mixing subjects or types of problems.
Yes. Schmidt and Bjork's 1992 paper argued that varied practice, mixing things up, leads to better long-term learning than practicing one thing repeatedly. Blocked practice, even though blocked practice feels easier and more productive at the time.
Like that art study you mentioned, Cornell and Bjork, 2006.
That's the one. Students learned to identify painters' styles. One group saw all of artist A's paintings, then all of artist B's, and so on, blocked practice. The other group saw paintings by all the artists mixed together and interleaved.
And the interleave group did better later on.
Significantly better at identifying the style of new paintings by those artists. But here's the kicker. The students themselves mostly thought the blocked practice was more effective.
So our intuition about what feels like good learning can be wrong.
Often, yes. Effective learning can feel slow and effortful. Doug Rohrer saw this as a math teacher. Kids ace the unit tests on, say, calculating the volume of spheres. But on the cumulative final, when sphere problems were mixed with prism problems and cone problems, they struggled. They couldn't figure out which formula to use.
They couldn't discriminate between the problem types.
Exactly. That's why John Saxon's math textbooks, with their constant mixed review, incorporating old problem types into new assignments, were effective. Rohrer later did research confirming this. Interleaving different types of math problems improved kids' ability to both solve the problems and choose the right method.
Mixing it up forces you to constantly practice identifying the problem type, not just executing a known procedure.
Precisely. And this leads to the ultimate learning without thinking, perceptual discrimination.
Okay, what's that?
Think of an expert baseball batter. They have milliseconds to judge a pitch speed, location, spin, and decide whether to swing. It's not conscious calculation, it's a highly developed perceptual skill, a good eye.
An intuition based on seeing thousands of pitches.
Right, or Adrian de Groot's chess studies. Grandmasters could memorize complex board positions almost instantly, not because they had better overall memory, but because they saw meaningful patterns, chunks, where novices just saw individual pieces. They had this infrared vision for the relevant information.
They perceive the underlying structure automatically.
Yes, and Philip Kelman's work tries to train this directly using perceptual learning modules, like software that flashes different equations and graphs rapidly, or simulators for aircraft instruments. The goal is, through repeated exposure, to get learners to just feel the right answer, to develop that intuition.
So you're training the brain's pattern recognition systems directly, bypassing slow conscious analysis.
That's the idea. It's about developing that intuitive feel, especially useful in areas like math or science, where recognizing underlying patterns is crucial.
Wow. Okay, so from neurons firing to spacing, testing, incubation, and now this perceptual learning, it's a much richer and frankly weirder picture of learning than the sort of simple, study hard, remember well model.
Absolutely. We've covered the basic biology, the importance of context, the power of spaced repetition and retrieval practice, letting ideas incubate, and even tapping into this subconscious perceptual learning.
It really does offer a toolkit of practical strategies, things you, our listener, can actually use to make learning feel less like a chore and more effective.
Definitely. These aren't just lab curiosities. They have real-world applications for anyone trying to learn anything.
So maybe the final thought for you to chew on is this. Pick one area where you're trying to learn something. Think about how you usually approach it. Now, how could you incorporate just one of these ideas? Maybe try interleaving it with related topics. Or deliberately use spaced retrieval practice instead of just rereading.
Yeah, just try one thing, see what happens.
Yeah.
What if we all adopted a bit more of that foraging brain approach?
Yeah.
Less pressure for immediate results, more mixing things up, more allowing for percolation. What kind of understanding could that unlock?
A fascinating question to end on. Thanks for sharing your sources, and thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure. Until next time.